We all know that losing someone you love is hard, but when that loss might have been preventable, you're left carrying a whole new kind of burden. Grief mixed with questions, confusion, stress, and a sense of injustice. This video is here to help. I'm going to walk you through exactly what Missouri law says about wrongful death claims, who can bring one, what has to be proven, what kind of compensation is available, and what the process looks like. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're unsure what to do next, I'm going to give you clear, honest answers so you can feel a little more grounded and in control during a time when everything else feels upside down. Let's start with the basics. What is a wrongful death claim? A wrongful death claim is a legal claim that arises when someone dies because of another person's negligence or intentional act. In plain English, it's the legal version of "this shouldn't have happened." Here are some real-world examples. A drunk driver runs a red light and causes a crash that kills someone. A doctor makes a mistake during a surgery that could have been prevented. Or a property owner ignores a known hazard and someone falls and dies as a result. If the person had survived, they would have had a right to bring a personal injury claim. But since they passed away, the law gives certain family members the right to file a wrongful death lawsuit on their behalf. Now, one quick point. This is not the same as a criminal case. A criminal case is about punishment, jail, and fines. A wrongful death case is civil. It's about holding the at-fault party financially accountable and helping the family recover losses. You can actually have both a criminal case and a civil case going at the same time. And even if there's no conviction in the criminal case, you can still win a wrongful death case. That's because the burden of proof is lower. A well-known example of this is the O.J. Simpson case that some of us might remember. He was found not guilty in the criminal trial for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman, but later he lost the civil wrongful death lawsuit brought by the victims' families. The jury in the civil case awarded $33.5 million in damages, and that's because in a criminal case, guilt must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. That means there can be no reasonable doubt in your mind that the defendant is guilty. Now, in a civil case for wrongful death, the standard is lower, just a preponderance of the evidence. And that means the jury only has to believe that it's more likely than not that your claims are true. Put another way, they just have to be 51% sure. Now let's break down something most people don't realize about wrongful death law. Who's actually allowed to file a claim? One of the hardest parts of Missouri's wrongful death law is this: not every grieving family member has a right to file a claim. You might assume that if you've lost someone you love, you automatically have the right to take legal action, but that's not always true. Missouri law has strict rules about who can bring a wrongful death lawsuit, and some relatives, no matter how close they were to the deceased family member, might not be able to file a claim. Missouri law ranks family members by legal priority when it comes to who can bring a wrongful death claim, and it doesn't go by who was emotionally closest to the person. It follows a specific legal order. And there are two main groups of people who may bring a wrongful death lawsuit in Missouri. First, the law gives priority to the spouse, children, or the parents of the person who died. This includes biological and adoptive relationships as well as children of any deceased children. In other words, the deceased person's grandchildren if their own child passed away before them. If none of those individuals are living or able to bring the claim, then siblings of the deceased or their descendants, meaning the deceased's nieces and nephews if their parent has also passed away, can then bring a claim. And if there's no surviving spouse, children, grandchildren, parents, siblings, or nieces and nephews, then the court can appoint what's called a plaintiff ad litem to file a wrongful death lawsuit. This is someone who the court appoints, usually at the request of someone who would have been entitled to share in the recovery by virtue of their relationship with the deceased, and it ensures that even when a close family member isn't available, those with a relationship to the deceased still have a way to pursue the claim. It's also important to understand that if anyone from a higher priority class is living and eligible to file a claim, then no one from a lower class can file, even if their relationship with the deceased was closer or more involved. For example, let's say a woman dies and is survived by an estranged adult son and a very close niece who helped care for her for years. Even though the niece may have had a stronger emotional bond, she can't bring a wrongful death claim if the son, who falls in a higher priority class, is alive and eligible. Another important thing to understand is that regardless of how many people are entitled to bring a claim, only one lawsuit can be filed, and the person bringing that lawsuit does so on behalf of the entire class of persons who are beneficiaries of Missouri's wrongful death law. If there's a financial recovery, Missouri courts will divide the money fairly among the family members, and we'll talk more about how the court does that in a few minutes. Now that we've talked about who can file a claim, let's talk about what it actually takes to prove one. To win a wrongful death case in Missouri, there are 4 things that you need to prove, and I'm going to keep it simple. First, duty of care. This just means that the person had a legal responsibility to act in a reasonably safe way. A driver has a duty to obey traffic laws. A doctor has a duty to follow medical standards. A business owner has a duty to keep their premises safe. It's about what a responsible person should do in a given situation. Second, breach of that duty. That's when someone violates their legal responsibility. Maybe they were speeding, maybe they ignored a dangerous condition, maybe they didn't follow medical standards. It's about showing that they acted carelessly or recklessly when they shouldn't have. Third, you have to prove causation. You have to show that the careless action caused your loved one's death. That means proving a direct link between what the other person did or failed to do and the loss that your family is now living with. If the person would still be alive but for the defendant's action, that's causation. Here's a clear-cut example. A drunk driver runs a red light and crashes into another car, killing the driver on impact. There's no question that the death was caused by the reckless act. But here's a more complex example. A patient goes to a hospital with a treatable condition, but the doctor fails to recognize warning signs of a stroke. The patient dies days later. In that case, an expert testimony may be needed to prove that the misdiagnosis, not the underlying condition, was the true cause of the death. In other words, the patient would have survived if the diagnosis wasn't missed. So while some cases are straightforward, others require medical or technical experts to kind of connect the dots, and that's where building the case carefully really matters. Fourth, you have to prove damages. That means you have to prove that your family suffered a loss, and that's usually not hard to show in a wrongful death case. Your damages will include medical bills, funeral expenses, lost income that the deceased person would have earned if they continued living, and the emotional and practical void left behind by the person's death. Let's go through a hypothetical example so we can see how all these elements fit together. Say a driver is texting behind the wheel and they blow through a stop sign and T-bone your daughter's car. She's rushed to the hospital, but she doesn't survive. In that case, the driver had a duty to obey traffic laws and pay attention. They breached that duty by texting. That breach caused the crash and your daughter's injuries, and your family is left grieving with funeral costs, lost income, and the permanent loss of her love, companionship, and guidance. That's a wrongful death case. That's how those 4 elements come together in real life. Now, some things make these cases stronger, like video footage, eyewitnesses, or a police report showing that the driver was intoxicated, but not every case is that clear-cut. Sometimes the facts are disputed, sometimes there are multiple causes, sometimes the biggest challenge is limited insurance coverage or disagreements among the family members. Still, when you understand what makes a strong case, you're in a better position to move forward with confidence. Now let's talk about what kind of compensation Missouri law allows in a wrongful death case. There are 2 main categories: economic damages and non-economic damages. Economic damages are the financial losses. Think medical bills related to the deceased's medical treatment from their final injury, or funeral and burial expenses, or lost income and benefits that the deceased would have earned had they not died. For lost income, we often have to bring in financial experts to estimate the future earnings based on life expectancy, career trajectory, and then historical earnings. Now, non-economic damages are more personal. They include the loss of companionship, guidance, and support, the loss of services that the person provided at home, and in some cases, the pain and suffering that the person went through before they died. These non-economic damages are typically proven through testimony from friends, family, or neighbors who can help the jury understand the depth of the family's loss. Now, Missouri also allows for what are called aggravated circumstances damages, and these are similar to punitive damages that we have in other cases, but technically Missouri does not permit punitive damages in wrongful death cases. Instead, when the defendant's conduct is especially reckless or egregious, such as in a drunk driving case, the jury may consider aggravating circumstances when deciding how much to award. And these damages are meant to reflect the seriousness of the wrongdoing and to serve as a deterrent. Now, here's something that surprises a lot of people. Missouri does not allow compensation simply for your grief. But what the law does recognize is the value of the relationship you lost. In other words, the law does not compensate you for grief and bereavement, but for the loss of your loved one's role in your life. Their companionship, their guidance, support, and everything they contributed to your world. So while Missouri doesn't compensate for emotional pain in the abstract, it does try to account for the real, lasting impact of losing someone who deeply mattered to you. Now let's walk through what the actual legal process looks like once a wrongful death claim moves forward. Sometimes the process begins with a pre-lawsuit settlement demand, and this is common when the at-fault party has limited insurance coverage and liability is fairly clear. And in those situations, we may try to resolve the case before ever filing a lawsuit, especially if doing so can avoid unnecessary costs and delays for the family. Now, if the case doesn't settle, the next step is to file a lawsuit. And once that happens, both sides enter a phase called discovery, where they use court procedures to gather evidence, obtain testimony from witnesses, and prepare the case for trial. Now, most wrongful death cases settle before trial, especially if liability is clear. But if not, the case goes to trial and a jury decides the outcome. And if a wrongful death case results in a settlement or a financial award from a jury, and there's more than one family member eligible to receive part of it, the court steps in to make sure the money is divided fairly. It doesn't matter whether the case settles early or goes all the way to trial. The court still has to approve how the money gets split, based on Missouri law and what's fair to the people involved. If all family members agree on how the settlement should be divided, then the court will hold a settlement approval hearing. And at that hearing, the judge reviews the terms of the settlement, confirms that the agreement is fair and reasonable, and then approves the distribution. But if the family members don't agree on how to split the settlement, then the court will hold an apportionment hearing. And in that case, each person can present their position, and then the judge will make a final decision. And the judge is going to consider things like each person's relationship to the deceased, their level of financial independence, and the emotional and practical impact of the loss. Now, whether by agreement or apportionment, the court's job is to make sure the recovery is distributed in a fair and lawful way. And every family is different. Some can work together to reach a resolution, while others need help from the court to sort it out. And sometimes, if there's a disagreement or a conflict between family members, they may need separate legal representation to make sure everyone's interests are fairly considered. Now let's talk about one of the most important legal deadlines that applies to wrongful death cases: how long you have to bring a claim. In Missouri, the time limit for filing a wrongful death claim, called the statute of limitations, is generally 3 years from the date of the death. And most people think 3 years is a long time to file a claim, but in wrongful death cases, it's really not. Here's why that deadline sort of creeps up on people so fast. Grief slows everything down, and even apart from grief, investigating the circumstances around a person's death takes time. Sometimes an autopsy is necessary to determine the true cause of the death, and other times we have to file legal motions just to get access to the deceased's medical records so we can evaluate whether we have a case. And if liability isn't clear, we may need to bring in expert witnesses or accident reconstructionists to evaluate what happened. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to gather evidence and locate reliable witnesses. That's why it's important to start early, even if you're not ready to file a lawsuit. Having that initial conversation can help protect your ability to move forward later. If you miss the deadline, your right to pursue the claim is likely gone, so it's worth reaching out sooner rather than later just to understand your options and preserve your rights. So if you're not sure about filing a wrongful death claim yet, that's okay. You've got a lot on your plate right now. You have a lot to think about. But here's what you can do right now to protect your rights later. You can start gathering important documents such as the death certificate, the police reports, any medical records. You can write down memories of what happened while they're still fresh in your mind. You can keep track of expenses related to the death, such as funeral costs, medical bills, or counseling bills. You can also talk to your family about who might be involved in filing the claim. Even if you don't pursue anything right away, Taking some of these steps right now will make things easier if you decide to act later. I hope this video gave you some clarity during a time that probably feels confusing and overwhelming. And let me just say this, pursuing a wrongful death claim isn't about revenge or putting a price tag on someone's life. It's about making sure your family is taken care of and holding people accountable so that what happened to you doesn't happen to someone else. I've had clients say, I feel guilty even thinking about money after losing a loved one. And that's completely normal. But this isn't about greed. It's about protecting your family's future and getting justice in a way that matters. If you're in Missouri, I encourage you to speak with a Missouri wrongful death attorney. They can walk you through your rights and your options and what makes sense for your family. If you're ready to talk to someone or even just thinking about it, I'll leave a link to contact me in the description below. I'll listen, answer any questions you have, and help you understand your options. There's no pressure and no cost just to talk. Just a real conversation with someone who does this kind of work every day. I want you to take care of yourself. You don't have to figure it out all on your own, but now you've got some knowledge, and that's a good place to start.